So welcome everyone. Welcome to the Zero to Hero Flutter workshop. We'll be helping you guys or assisting you guys to build your first Flutter app. Now, more about me. My name is Pranavar Nambiar. I am a third year CSE undergrad here at Amrita School of Engineering, and we'll be getting to know more about Vinayak in the later part of the presentation. Now, why Flutter? When did Flutter come? Who created Flutter? I think these are the questions that are in your head right now. We'll try to clear all that up. Now, Flutter. What is Flutter? Flutter is basically a UI toolkit created by Google. Now, right now there are many cross-platform toolkits out there. One of them is Xamarin. The other one is React Native. And the third one is, of course, Flutter. Now, how does Flutter help you? Now, Flutter helps you in creating applications, that is cross-platform application, double quotes on cross-platform here, with a single code base. Now, to make it clear, just write your code in one language, which is Dart, click on build, and you get 3 different applications. Yes, it's that simple. So it's created by Google, and Flutter came into existence because right now there are 2 types of development out there. That is Android development and iOS development, basically to create apps. Now let's imagine that there's a company out there. They'd like to create the next Cred or the next Paytm or the next Facebook. To do this, they'll have to hire 2 separate teams, right? Because a person will be really proficient in Android development, another person would be really proficient in iOS development. So to do that, you need to hire 4, let's imagine 4 devs for the Android development part, 4 devs for the iOS development part. So totally you have 8 people working for the company. And another problem with this is, as you hire more people, the outcome, it's very difficult to manage. It's very difficult to have the same productivity level. Second thing is the cost also increases for the company. The third thing is iOS or the Apple ecosystem, they have their own guidelines for design. Google or the Android part, they have their own guidelines, which is the material design guidelines for their applications. So coming to a neutral point or a neutral position for this is very difficult. So that's the thing Android devs and iOS devs have been facing right now to create an app, make an app cross-platform. So this is where Flutter comes. Flutter helps you in building apps, not only Android, not only iOS, but also a web app and also a desktop app. Now you can see in the right side of the screen, you can see a GIF. It's made by Flutter with Dart. You can see how interactive and how unique the design is. We'll learn about the design aspect later. Coming to the design aspect here we've seen that a lot of devs were able to easily create beautiful UIs and user experiences with the help of Flutter. Because see, at the end of the day, if you're creating a product and if it's not easy for a person to use, then there's no point in making the product, especially if it's a web application or if it's an application or an app. So UI is the main thing. Then comes the usability, or I think they both go hand in hand. One can't exist without the other. So in this thing, you can see that there's a lot of graphically intensive thing happening here in the right side of the screen. You can see that there's a scrolling function happening here to go from registration to a login page. Now, this was very easy to make in Flutter. And with Flutter, the most important thing is you can control every pixel on the screen. And we've seen that a lot of devs were able to achieve design awards for their beautiful UI that they've created for their apps using Flutter. Now, coming to the next thing, why Flutter is being used, the most important thing is the speed it delivers. Now, most of the apps built with Flutter have achieved 60 FPS. FPS here means frames per second. So 60 FPS. Now, an app made using Android or made using Android Studio using Java and an app made using Swift in Xcode get the same 60 FPS. So that's a huge thing for the Flutter community, because if you can reach up to the level of the native development, that's a huge thing. Flutter uses Dart, as I've mentioned, and Dart helps in compiling your code into native machine code. We'll learn about that in the next few slides. The third thing is productivity. Now, as I've said in my example a minute back about increasing productivity, that's basically a company they just have to hire around 4 devs who's proficient in Flutter, and they can create 4 different apps for 4 different platforms with the same code base, and this increases the productivity 3 times, or you can say threefold, with just a single code base. Now, the most important thing here is Flutter uses something called as hot restart and hot reload. Usually, when you're an Android developer, when you have to change something really small, like a text or a color of a button, you'll have to compile the code again, which takes around 10 to 15 minutes itself. So changing small things are a humongous task for an Android developer or a iOS developer. So here, Flutter helps you by providing something called as hot restart. So if you change something like a text or anything, it reloads fast, just like how things work in the web development domain. You just have to change a small thing, it comes in the simulator, or sorry, the emulator pretty quickly. Now, coming to the cross-platform thing. Now, Flutter was initially developed for Android and iOS. So they were out in in production, I think 2 to 3 years back itself. And web and desktop, they are pretty new to the scene. So I think they are in production for the past 1 month. So there's okay, I can understand you guys want to understand what is the difference between production, beta release, and alpha release. So when somebody creates something, the first thing that they do is they put it in the alpha release so that few people of the developer can use it. Then they put it in the beta release so that people who really want to try it out can use it, and then they put it out for production. So that's the 3 basic terms. You guys have to really understand the 3 basic terms if you are really keen on publishing an app in Play Store or App Store. Now, coming to the approach that Flutter used, let's just understand what approach the native guys have used, or Java native, that is Android developers and iOS developers have used. So just imagine what happens here. Okay, so just forget about these 2 text boxes, the widget rendering box and the platform channels here. Just completely forget. Now, coming to the Android development part. Yes. So what happens is you write your code in Java, and the code is then compiled, and then you can access services like location, Bluetooth, Android audio, and sensors. This is because the operating system itself is created in Java, so it's pretty easy for you guys, for people to directly access things like Bluetooth, location, audio, etc. That's why, if you think about it, Android development and iOS development people, they have achieved higher performance. Now, let us take other cross-platform methodologies, like, for example, React Native that I've explained before. What happens is React Native, what it does is you write your code in JavaScript, let's imagine, because React Native uses JavaScript, and it gets converted with the help of something called as a bridge. So forget these 2 text boxes. Imagine a huge text box here, something called as a bridge. So the bridge converts the JavaScript and enables it to use UI components. So there's a huge text box called as bridge, and it helps you to access all these things. Let's imagine that way. Now, the problem here is bridge is very performance intensive and time intensive. So if you have to create an application that requires a lot of UI intensive work, or it's basically using a lot of processing speed or GUI speed or something like that, it's going to be really hectic because it won't happen that quickly. All right. Okay, how is Flutter different here? Now, what happens is right when you code the code in Dart, it gets rendered right. It gets rendered in the app itself. So you can directly access all these things, especially the events. So just imagine events are something like UI components in an app. You can directly access all these things here. And how do I access things like location, Bluetooth, audio, and sensors? Aren't they platform specific? Is the question that you should have in your head right now. Yes, they are platform specific, but with Flutter, they allow you to write native code in specific platform channels, so you can access Bluetooth, for example, in Android. You can access the snipping tool in Windows using the native code right in Flutter. So that's a huge thing for the cross-platform technologies out there. Now coming to Dart. Now Dart is basically the underlying technology or the underlying programming language used in Flutter. And Dart is a client optimized language. It's basically an object-oriented language, and it is class based. So what do I mean by class based? So I don't know how many of you uh, are well versed with C and C++ and Java. So the syntax of Dart is made exactly like C. They've inspired a lot of things. They've got inspired a lot of the syntax have been inspired from C++ or C. Now, Flutter basically uses something called as packages. So there's a website called as pub.dev. We'll go into detail after some time. Now, we'd like to, I think Vinayak could post something called as the Dart documentation in your thing. So I think I'll just teach you guys some basic things about the Dart language. So if you there's a website called as dartpad.dev. I'll put the link in the chat for you guys to code it with me. So I guess it's there. Now, what is Dartpad? So Dartpad is basically an online compiler for you to understand and learn the Dart language. It is again made by the Flutter team and the Google team. Now, just to compare this programming language with C, I think most of you would have understood that it's very similar to C right now, the syntax and everything. Now, for those who don't understand C or C++, I'll just go into a very basic explanation here. So this is a function right here. Well, I hope you guys can see my screen. So this is a function right here. It's called as print integer. It's a camel case. I've written it in camel case. So this is a function right here, and I've defined the function. So inside the function definition, I've written something called as a print statement. So the print statement allows you to print something into the console or into the terminal. And I've passed something called as a local variable. A local variable is a variable that can be used only where it's been mentioned. That's the easy way to put it. And so there's something called as a void main. I think you guys would know what a void main is. So inside the void main, I've initiated or initialized another variable, which is called as I've named it number, and I'm initializing it to 42. And then what I'm trying to do is I'm going to pass the number or the variable here inside this function. Now this goes directly into the function definition here, and it gets printed, if you guys can see. All right, I think you have to wait a second because it's an online compile. Yeah, sure, that's done. Now, more about Dart. Now, Dart is basically a statically typed language, right? So what do you mean by a statically typed language? So to understand that, let me just create another. So here I've given the value number is equal to 42, right? Now I'm going to give this number another. I'm going to give it a string. All right, and let's see what happens. So this results in error. So what statically typed languages mean are what do they basically mean? So if the type of the variable is known at the compile time, then you can call it as a statically typed language. Now, another example of a statically typed language would be C or C++. Now, what is a dynamically typed language, right? So a dynamically typed language has their type associated at the runtime. Okay, I'll give you an example on how to differentiate between them. So this won't work here because this can only be taken by a dynamically typed language. So since Dart is a statically typed language, it throws an error here. Now let's compare it with another language, which is Python, which is dynamically typed. Now here, let's take in the example of the same example. I've given a value to the number variable here as 5, and I'm giving a string value here, and I'm going to print it. So you can see that it gets printed here. So this is the basic example or the basic difference between statically typed and dynamically typed. Just a basic thing for you guys to understand. Now I'm going to talk more about a few data structures just so that you can understand tomorrow's hands-on session in an efficient way. Now let's just see that. Let's just see the first this thing. So one more thing. So what do you mean by var number? So what happens here is var basically means variable. So I'm making this a variable is what it means. I think it's similar to JavaScript in some way. So it's a modern language, right? So they have taken inspiration from multiple other languages and they've created something new here. So yeah, let me just explain other data structures. So one would be list. So what happens here is that if I create a variable called as mine, all right, and I've equated it and I've opened my brackets here, square, I'm gonna give uh, I'm gonna give a number here, few numbers, and I'm gonna run this. So this is basically a list. A list can easily be compared to an array in Java, or an array, or a series, or a panda series in Python, or just another list in Python. So that's how we can compare a list in that. So I think you have to give a semicolon here, and I didn't want to throw an error. So I guess it will work now. Now, so another thing would be, this is how lists work. Now, what else do I have? So let's just see. Another type of data structure would be something called as a maps, something called as a maps. And another type of data structure would be something called as sets. Now, these things are very important here. I'll just explain what a set is. Now, let's imagine that you're creating a variable called as mine again. You're equating or my, and you're equating it to, you're opening this flower brackets and you're defining it with a few strings. Yeah, and you're trying to run that into this thing. So here, okay, there's a small error here. Just I forgot to mention it. Since I've defined integer here, you can't really pass it here. I completely forgot about that. So I'm just gonna put a print statement here. Right? So yeah, this will work. So what happens here is my here is a set. My here is called as a set. Now, what is the difference between a list and a set? So a list, basically you can add elements just like an array, whereas a set will have unique elements. So every element will be completely unique. Another way, so if you want to, if you'd like me to run the thing, you can see that I get the result here. Now, what is the other way to create a set? So in Flutter or in Dart, most of the codes that when you see, they have a different type of initializing it. So let's just create var my. I'll just delete the other slide, the code line. Okay, fine. So var my. What I'm trying to do here is I'm gonna do something called as I'm gonna give the data type here, and then I'm gonna open the flower brackets and I'm gonna close it with a semicolon. Now, what does this mean, and why do we need to do this? All right. So here the set here is defined with no elements. So if I print my here right now, it will have no elements. 1 minute. Yeah. So it will have no elements. Now, there are two things that I can do here. How do I add an element to it? So I call my, then I append a function here, which is called as an add function. So it's called as an add function. So I put in a value called as first here, use it with a semicolon. Just understand, guys, it's a very basic thing. Just for those who really don't know anything about programming, I'm just trying to give you guys the basics. So here what happens is the first value is getting appended inside the thing. And if you run it, you will get the value first here. So that's basically it. So what if you have another list called as hey, and you have some values like hey, hello, etc. And what you'd like to do is you'd like to put the values of this set inside this set okay, so you'd like to put the values of hey inside my, right? So you could use something called as add all function. All right, so add all function allows you to add the contents of other set into your base set. So to do this, just specify hey here and just close it with a semicolon here. So you will, if you run it, you will get hey and hello, because my is getting printed, you'll get hey and hello. So that's one thing. The third and the most important thing. So I guess you guys will have a question here. Why can't I just do this? Or wait, why can't I just do this? Why can't I just do this for a set? Why do I have to go the other long route of defining it? Now, this is where something called as maps come into the picture. So when you do something like this, it creates a map with no values. So you can't really say that this is a set anymore. So map is a fourth type of structure that we have. So you can compare maps to a dictionary in Python. That's the easiest way to put it. So maps are just like the dictionary in Python. So you can give a key, value, key one, and you can give a key, and then you can give a value here. So that's basically it, right? So this is how maps work. Now there's another way to actually define a map. Now, and this is the way that most of the Flutter devs out there will be coding or using. So let's imagine that. So since the maps data structure uses two things, that's the key and the value, you can define it like this. So you call something called as a maps constructor. So I'm not going into much detail about what a constructor is. So you call something called as a maps constructor. Then what you do is you define the variable or the data type. So define the data type for the key. Then you define the data type for the value, and then you make it a function that is a constructor, and then you end it with a semicolon. So this is one way of putting it. So I'm sorry, I just put in maps, so it's just map here. So okay, so this is one way of putting it. Right. So how do I put elements into this? So it's pretty easy. Just call the variable, use a square bracket, because that's how you call. That's how you do it. So call the key value, equate it to your thing. So if you call my of first here, you get the value hey. All right. Yeah, you get the value here. So that's basically it. So just imagine, guys, there are only three things that you have to learn: list, set, and maps. So these are the data structures that we'll be working with tomorrow. And I think you'll have to read a lot about the other aspects, because basically right now what you can do is you can compare the programming language that you've learned, and then you can compare that with Dart and try to understand and pick up things fast. It's very easy for you guys to learn. So just wanted to put out just small fine details out there. All right. So this is entirely about Dart. I think I'll be putting out, I don't know if Vinayak's put the Dartpad or no, Dart's documentation out there. I think he'll be putting it in a second or so. Now coming back to the slides, I think Vinayak will be taking over from here. So he will talk about the app that we've built, and we just wanted you guys to know an app that's been in production, because production basically means that's deployed. That means it's been deployed in Play Store or in App Store. So we just wanted you guys to experience an app like that. I think Vinayak will be taking over from here.
Yeah. So, hi, my name is Vinayak, and I am someone who has learned Flutter in a very unconventional way. I'm just gonna be telling you guys about how I learned Flutter and how you guys can do it too. It's pretty easy. I felt it as really easy compared to other languages. I've even tried with React Native, and I feel that, once you have an idea for an app and you really want to implement it, Flutter can really help you get there. So the use here is that you can just type a single code base and launch it in all sorts of platforms, like for Android, for iOS, for Windows. For all of them, you can use it with only by learning Flutter. But otherwise, you'll have to learn natively. You'll have to learn Java and Swift and C++ individually for them. What Flutter does is with a single code base, you can do all sorts of things. So I'm just gonna show you guys a sample of our product that we've created. It's called Xdrop and it's out there on the Play Store. You can just Google it. Like if you just search for Xdrop, you can find it there. And if we have everything set up, we have it in 3 platforms as of now for Android, iOS, and Windows. It's basically an app which lets you send files between your devices offline. So I'm sure most of you would have heard about Xenter and Share It. I'm not sure how many of you know, but then we try to create something similar, but something much better than that, which you can transfer between your Android phone and your PC. I'm sure like all of you would have come across a situation where even well, like during exams after we click pictures of our answer sheet, we may need to upload it, so we may want to send it to our PC fast. So I use this app for that, and I'll just show you a sample of how it is. This is a sample of how the product looks like, and this is a Windows desktop app. I'll just so say for example, I have my phone next to me. I'm just opening the app, and if I need to send a file to my PC, so okay, this is gonna take a minute. I'm just opening the app. In this throughout this whole section, I'm also gonna be explaining how exactly you can make a similar UI like this, and yeah, slowly I'll be explaining about how widgets help in Flutter. All right, so I'm just gonna select a file from my phone. There we go. I just sent a file right now and there it just came up here. So it's that easy and you can just open up or send all kinds of files to your PC between your devices. It also works in iOS and we're working on the macOS version 2. So let me explain a little bit about Flutter. All right. I'm sure most of you know what a widget is, right? Like even in our home screen, we may see a clock widget, like in our phone's home screen, a clock widget or a Gmail widget wherein you can just quickly type a mail or something. The same way Flutter also is made up of widgets. Your entire life cycle, like the from starting to beginning, everything involves widgets that you see. In Flutter, widgets are divided into 2 basic ones, which is called as stateless and a stateful widget. A stateless widget is basically something constant, like a text or an image. You don't want it to change as per like when a user clicks a button, you don't want those images to change or move or anything. In that case, you use a stateless widget. These are basically types of widgets. Or if you want to show some kind of animation in your phone, for example, if you click a button, the screen shows some sort of swirling animation or something like that. For those kind of things, you use a stateful widget. All right. So these are some of the widgets that I have. I just noted down some of them which I know of. These are just common names like a container, a column row. All of you know what it is, right? The same way we can use each of these widgets in our app. Like if we want to enter a text, we use the term called text inside our code base and we can just enter the text and that's all. You can make that particular text appear in your app. You can use a card, you can use a divider, you can use icons, all sorts of things. So I'm just going to show a basic UI. Okay. I took a UI of an app called Telegram. This is a fan made UI. So I was just thinking, what can we implement something like this in Flutter? So Flutter basically has like a bunch of widgets. Like if you go to their documentation here, you can see different types of widgets. like a drawer or an app bar, you've observed like in, say for example, tab bar, all right? You've seen all of your screens on WhatsApp, right? It has three tabs if you observe. One is chats, status, calls. So if you want to implement the same thing, you just go to tab bar. You just go to the Flutter documentation, see about tab bar, and you can check out the implementation and do the same thing with your own app. So the entire app making process involves finding the right widget and then doing it. So my experience from doing projects is that firstly, before starting, or if you have an app idea or something like that, the first step is designing it out. You know, how do we make the design so well that the user feels comfortable using it? Most of the apps we use nowadays, like WhatsApp, Instagram, all of them have been thought through a lot. There is a UX and a UI designer who have, been working on how do we make the user experience the best ever possible, and they've designed it. This design has been given to the engineers and they implement it. With Flutter, you will be able to implement it very easily. Like if you had to do this in a native code, it would take a lot of time. But using Flutter, you can just take the tab bar and put it in your code. So in Flutter, there's a basic widget called as scaffold. I want everyone to remember this name. It's called scaffold. And your app's main screen, like consider this is our app, all right? Our main app's parent widget is called as scaffold. And a scaffold is basically divided into three. All right. One is an app bar, another is a body, and third is a bottom navigation bar. I'm trying to replicate the same UI over here. So I put a scaffold and I divided my widget into three different widgets. So now this big widget has three different small widgets. Now I need to add all these texts, buttons, and all those kind of things. So what I do is I add a button there and a text here. That's it. This is another two widgets. There's a widget called as icon button. There's a widget called as text, and there's a widget called as column also. So you observe that all of these cards are arranged in a column. So what do you do inside scaffold? Inside that you create an app bar. Inside the app bar, you add buttons in a row and a text along with that in the same row. And in the body, you add a column, and in the column you add multiple lists. That's it. It's that easy, and you can just implement the same UI into your own phone or own app, I mean. So more about like how a hands-on coding, I'll probably show you guys a UI or a sample app that we could make tomorrow, so that we can build an app together. And yeah, same way over here, the bottom navigation bar, you can add a bunch of buttons there, and that's it. It's that easy with Flutter. And next, I'm going to be explaining about pub.dev. Now, have you guys ever wondered like what what if I have an app idea? Like I'm going to give something very simple. Like what if it's an app wherein you just open and you can see the user's mobile device model and battery information and IMEI number and all of that. Okay. What if you want to make an app like that? Now I know how to place widgets. I know I can place a text here and a widget, what do you say, a button here. But how do I make stuff appear there? Where does the backend come from? So there's this place, it's a website, it's called pub.dev. And if you go over there, it's a website. Pub.dev is basically a collection of packages. You search for anything over here, you will get it. All right. It's an official website by the Flutter community themselves. And if I just search for something like device info, because that's what I want. Like I want to show some of my device info here. You'll find a bunch of packages. You as a developer, individual developers have also uploaded their packages here, and you have some packages by the Flutter community themselves. So this package is called device info. So what happens is if I use this function, I can basically make the user's device's info appear on the screen. So you can just use this package. Now, how do I import this package into my project? We'll see about that later. And just wanted to give like a brief introduction on how this pub.dev works. Now I'll just show you a sample like of a little bit of code like of a Flutter project. I hope you all can see like in this we have multiple folders like out of these folders lib is the folder which is the most important where we perform most of the coding. Now you'll observe that there's an Android folder, there's an iOS folder, there's a Windows folder also. So what happens is if you type a code in this dart file here, it automatically gets converted into native what do you say native Android, native Java or Swift for iOS or C++ for Windows, and we can implement that. All right, so next I'm going to be telling about IDEs support. You guys can either use Android Studio, Visual Studio Code, IntelliJ, all of these IDEs support Flutter, but I mostly prefer you guys use VS Code because I personally feel that it's much more easier to use. So setting up the development environment. All right, I'll give it over to Pranav. He'll just explain about how you can set up the environment. I'll just send a link on how you can download Flutter and start making the app.
Yeah, so basically, I think both of us we've learned downloading stuff and everything from YouTube videos, right? So I think the best way to learn is to go through the documentation. So just search for something called as, I think Vinayak will be putting it in the chat. Search for something called as
Yeah,
Flutter documentation or the Flutter.
yeah.
So depending on your operating system, you'll have to choose something over here. And we're just gonna give you a basic walkthrough because we know it's completely basic for us to explain all this. So just follow. So if you're a Windows user, just go to the Windows bar and click it. Follow all the guidelines is given here. We really think most of you will have troubles to set it up because even we've had some trouble here or there, but I think it's most of the time it happens pretty quickly. So yeah, just follow the documentation over here depending on your system. So one thing we'd really like to put it out there is we need basically the Flutter SDK to run the Flutter code or the Dart code. The second thing we want is Android Studio. We'll tell you why Android Studio is needed here. Now, we find it really comfortable to code in VS Code, so we would prefer that you guys use VS Code instead of IntelliJ and other WebStorm and etc. Sublime Text and everything else. So we really prefer VS Code. So go the VS Code way. That will be our recommendation. Now coming to the macOS, yeah. So why do we need Android Studio, right? So why? So Android Studio basically has something called as an emulator. So I think for me to show you guys, so I think I'll take an example of VS Code right here. So just I'll just open one of my. Yeah, I think you guys can see the code, right? So this is my VS Code. So so you need to install the Flutter extension over here. So there's something called as the extensions tab in VS Code. So search for Flutter extensions. After you've downloaded the Flutter SDK and Android Studio, download the Flutter extension. Now after that, you can directly code it in Dart and Flutter. Now basically there are two ways to run your Flutter app, right? So one is the emulator. How to run the emulator? So basically when you're running the app, you can choose right here itself. So the problem here is we know that the emulator is pretty big in size. It's around 2 to 3 GB. I think mostly it will be 5 GB. I don't remember correctly. So what we'd really like you guys to do is use your phone as your emulator. So we'll be putting out a link for that. I think it's best not to explain that because it will only confuse you guys. So use your phone as your emulator. Now, what do you mean by the emulator in VS Code? So just when I'm running a certain app, I think this app will mostly give you an error. So this is what an emulator basically means. So you get a phone-like screen in your desktop or in your laptop, and when you're changing the code here, you get to see all those changes right here itself. So this is my emulator. This is basically a Pixel 2 phone. So whenever I code, whenever I change with the help of hot restart and hot reload, I can quickly see all my changes right here. But for you guys, again, I'm emphasizing on using your own phone as an emulator. And basically, I think most of you guys know how to switch on USB debugging. Go to your developer options, click on the build number 6 times. It's best not to explain all those things. We'll put out a link for you guys to be ready for tomorrow. And this is how the emulator looks. Emulator is just like another phone. You can do whatever you want. So these are all my builds. We've tried to create many things. So you can see all those Flutter apps right here. And that's basically it, guys. So I think you guys should get ready for tomorrow's session. And yeah, that's basically it. So I guess we can take some of the queries. It's already 5:50 right now. So we have around 10 minutes for queries. So if you guys have any queries, please feel free to ask us right now. Okay, good question, Vishnu. So Android Studio is not mandatory, but at the end of the day, if you are looking to build apps and see every day, every time you can't use your own mobile device to run or build apps because you have to use a cable, right? Because you have to use a cable and plug it into your laptop, and you have to run those apps. So if you are not able to download Android Studio, then the secondary or the better way would be to use phone. Yeah. See, the problem with Android Studio is Android Studio itself is it's a pretty huge thing, and on top of that, the emulator itself, the emulator that you guys saw itself, is another huge thing. So around 5 to 6 GB would be wasted there. So for this workshop, no, you guys don't have to download. But in future, if you are really into Flutter development, we'd recommend you guys use Android Studio. Exactly. Dart is the programming language and Flutter is the framework. Yes. In other words, Flutter is the UI toolkit. With Dart, you can write programs. For example, I've shown you a few basic things that I've done in Dartpad, right? So it's just like C++ or C. You can directly code things like that. So with Dart, they have created a bigger framework called as Flutter. So for the thing that we've taught you guys about statically type, dynamically type, and everything, those things are not really important because even I've learned it yesterday, today, etc. Because it's just that we didn't learn the conventional way. We didn't learn with our foundation set, but sometimes I think you have to learn with your foundation set. So so this is a better way for us to learn the basics for ourselves, for basics of Flutter too. So it's not just about teaching here; we're also learning here. So I think we are helping each other here. So things like maps and everything, it's good that you know, because if you are really looking out for developing bigger apps or complex UIs, if you have to use something like this, it will be more efficient because you'll already have that knowledge. Okay, I'll give you guys a piece of a trivia here because one app that's pretty famous. Okay, anybody can put it in the chat. An app that's pretty famous have been built by with Flutter right now. One app. So most of the apps in the Play Store are built using native Android native Java. But there's one pretty famous app that everybody's using. I guess even you will be using, and you'll be surprised that. And it's got a pretty good UI. Okay, so
Telegram.
no. Any other answer? Come on, you guys have used a lot of applications, right? So Alibaba is a company. Okay, you mean the e-commerce app? No. I mean, in a way, yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
in a
think
way,
yeah.
yes.
The Alibaba uses
Yeah.
Flutter.
They've actually tried to bring their next version in Flutter because they've actually understood the potential of Flutter. Because with one code base, you can create really good UI, and with one code base, you can create multiple apps, right? So yes, Alibaba would be another right answer. Okay, fine. but not the answer that I was thinking about. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. I'll give you the answer. It's basically Google Pay. So Google Pay right now, it's been built using Flutter, and you can see that the UI is pretty great. There have been minor issues with the UI rendering and stuff, but I'm pretty sure Google will be working on it. And that's the app that everybody's using, and it's built with Flutter. All right. Thanks.